Hi everyone, it's Aquila from A Lefty Knitter podcast. I thought I would do some voiceovers on a video that I shot of me cranking part of an order. This is a custom order for a customer on my Etsy shop, and if you go to the links down below, you'll find Nitty Bow Fiber Co. on Etsy where I do some cranking. I have some specific things that are listed in the shop, but this was a custom order with a returning customer that we've worked out some details. Right here I am using my Erlbacher Speedster Gearhart, and I have a 64 stitch cylinder in play right now. I am putting my bonnet onto the machine, and now I'm adding my buckle and my weights so I can add the waste yarn. And sorry my mast is not in view, but everything else is, so. I do reuse my waste yarn. I get my waste yarn from CSM Supplies, and I crank about halfway around. I lift the buckle and the weights with my knees, and I put the rest of those bonnet stitches on my machine. So now I'm going to crank a few rows of waste yarn onto my machine. I always stop at the 3 o'clock position, so I'm always using that same needle that's marked in the red. You can kind of see it there behind my yarn carrier. I do use a ripcord. A ripcord is, mine is a fishing line that I bought. I recommended from one of the videos I watched on the weight. I crank about 3/4 of the way around, and I start lifting all my needles out of play. This is to do an E-wrap cast on. I had gotten a book from Kathy Roletter. You can find her on Ravelry and get a book that is all about selvages. You can see here that I did not lift that stitch that needle all the way up. And now I am correcting that and putting my ripcord back on the needle and lifting it back up out of play. Tuck the ends of the fishing line or the ripcord inside, and I'm going to finish lifting all my needles out of play. I do have a slotted yarn carrier. I find it much easier if you mess up on a project, you can easily take it out of the yarn carrier instead of like ripping out your project to try to get it through the single hole. Now to do the E-wrap, I'm starting again at that first needle. I put my working yarn. This is my project yarn. This was yarn from Jinx Yarns, who is no longer dyeing, and you can do an E-wrap cast on 2 ways. You can wrap clockwise and you can wrap counterclockwise. This creates the bump, or not, don't know how to really explain it. It creates the edge of the selvage. The look looks a little bit different. I prefer to wrap my needles clockwise. At least if you're looking down in the machine, I'm wrapping them clockwise around the needle, and you go around each needle. And I will just continue going around each needle until I get back to the beginning. So because all of your needles are up in the up position, the out of work position, you can move your yarn carrier around so it's not in your way. I usually just leave it in the same spot, only because I've gotten used to wrapping the needles with it right there. So now once you get back to that last one, you're going to put your yarn back in your yarn carrier. This is where having a slotted yarn carrier really is amazing. If it's not slotted, you have to manipulate your working yarn around with your yarn carrier. All right. So now I am pushing all my needles back down into play that I can, making sure all your latches are open. That is the number one thing. And I will crank around past the first few stitches and put the rest of my needles down, again with the latches open, because you can only do so many needles because the cam gets in the way. And you will do 1 3/4 turns. So there's 1, and here is 3/4, stopping at the 6 o'clock position. This is where you put your ribber into place. I am doing a 1x1 rib. I have marked my ribber dial with purple. You can see it near my thumb. Having a little trouble there, obviously. There we go. And you got to make sure you put your pin back in that pushes your ribber dial around. So the purple mark on my ribber dial matches the mark on the front of my cylinder. So now I am taking out the cylinder needles, picking up the stitch that was on the cylinder needle with a ribber needle and placing that in every other one. That is creating my 1x1. I didn't mention, I did take my pick tool and I pulled the spring out and put it around the outside of that plate. There's a space for you to put that spring. And you have to make sure that you don't move your yarn carrier too far forward, or else you cannot get your ribber needles in. So I've moved it far enough forward. You can see where there's like the circular part of the ribber, and then it comes out like a little, not a ledge, but that's where the ribber needles go underneath of there, and that's what pushes your ribber needles out to create the stitch. So you're just gonna go all the way around, replacing cylinder needles with ribber needles. Again, making sure that the latch is open on your ribber needle. I'm gonna speed up this process here since you will not be able to see what I'm doing on the back side of the machine based on where my camera is sitting. So here we go. So now that we're back in view, you can see the purple mark on my cylinder dial, and you can see the blue mark on my ribber dial. You can see the blue mark on my cylinder. That is to ensure that I know I have my ribber lined up. I was explaining that earlier. And you don't have to take your spring off. You just have to crank it around slow until you get all your ribber needles in place, and then you will put your spring back in. And I'm almost there. One more. And then you put your spring back into place. I keep wiping my fingers on a rag that I keep on my leg, only because these are machines. You oil them. And you can see that we're now going to go around, and I go slowly to ensure I can watch each of my ribber needles come out and the latches are open. Again, making sure you do put that pin back in place that pushes your ribber around. I've done that before and jammed up my machine because I forgot to put the pin back in place. So I'm going to be doing 20 rounds here. I'm going to speed this up too. So I stop my machine with the yarn carrier close to 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock really, and I start replacing my ribber needles with cylinder needles again. I usually do about a quarter away around the cylinder, putting cylinder needle in, and then doing, so many of those. And then you take your ribber needle out slowly, lifting the stitch. Drop that one. Drop the needle, not the stitch. I had closed the latch when I did that, so that was me correcting it with my pick, making sure that the latch was open and the stitch was above it. And you will crank forward slowly, making sure you do not cover your ribber needles with that plate, because then you cannot access them. So put in a bunch of your cylinder needles, pushing the needle adjacent to it out to make room for the butt of the needle to go in under the spring, putting it down in the machine with the latch open. So I'm going to do a bunch of those, pretty much until I get around to where the ribber arm is and I can't access the needles anymore. Felt for them to be open, and now I'm transferring each stitch from a ribber needle back to a cylinder needle. So then you will be doing stockinette knitting again on your machine. We're going to fast forward this too. Now that we're back into view, I'll show you from this angle, getting a cylinder needle, pulling that needle out, like very easily just pushing that needle out the tiniest bit to get the one next to it in and behind that spring. Add the last one and transfer. Every time I do this, when you're pushing your little ribber needle out, it makes a little pop noise when you get past the latch. It's a good noise to hear, because if you don't hear that noise, you've probably lost your stitch that was on that rib needle. Sometimes you can catch that. There, checking for my latches open, I crank around just a little bit, and then I remove my ribber from my machine. So because this order is just ribbed on one end, tube on the other, and then waste yarn, I'm pretty much just going to be cranking the rest of this video. This is normal speed. I probably go a little fast here. But you get to know your machine, and you become one with your machine. You know which yarns work a little better. Some are thicker, some are thinner. They're all considered sock or fingering weight, but we all know in the yarn industry, not everything is exact. So I'm just holding my weights steady so they're not jangling around. Not that they do that, but they can swing. And if they do swing a little, you can get a little bit of weird tension. I've gotten down to where the weight was almost touching the ground. I'm moving my buckle up and putting my weight back on. You might have seen that I have a beer koozie on my weights. This just keeps them all together because the top weights, the smaller weights, are slotted and they will fall off the stem of the big weight, and you can drop them on a toe. I'm there at the end of my yarn. Again, I always crank to the same position. I think this helps just in general me and the people I'm sending their order to, because you can tell that I've started and stopped in the same position. You can make your tube as flat as possible. And see, that slotted yarn carrier really is just amazing. I have a couple colors of waste yarn, and I try to use the most contrast visually for the waste yarn, so it's easier for people to pick up those stitches or whatever they're doing. I do 12 or 13 rounds. Again, stopping at that same position, tuck your ends in, you hold it, you crank, and it falls off the machine. Not falls off, but it comes off. Just gonna remove everything so I can show you guys. There's the rib, and there's the tube with the waste yarn. Thanks for watching. Bye.